Welcome to another episode of Creative Spark. Today we're discussing our key learnings from Moving Waves. What have we learned about the performing arts and our practice in the last 8 years? So, join in.
Creative Spark. Episode 5. Key learnings from our practice in the performing arts.
So today we'll have very different perspectives. We've all come from different backgrounds and different years in the industry. So we've had Mary, you've joined us about 2 years ago.
Yes.
But you've been in the performing arts for a longer time.
Yeah, and I started back in Ireland as well, so it's quite different landscape of how I came to now.
So that'd be really interesting to chat through. And Alex, you've joined us in September.
Yeah, newbie. Well,
Feels like forever.
Nearly a year, I guess.
Yeah,
This
always.
year.
Yeah.
This year.
It
It's only
feels like a year. So much has happened.
Feels like.
Talking about the industry evolving. But you've graduated in 2019.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you'll also have different experiences
Yeah.
in the industry. So I've been doing this for the last 13 years in the facilitation world. I've been facilitating since 13 years ago. I've been in the performing arts for a longer time, but obviously I also grew up in a different country, so I have different experiences over the years. What I'd really like to know from your experience, how has the industry evolved? We know that in recent years, a lot of things have changed, especially since COVID, with everything going on. So how has the industry evolved since you graduated?
Well, I graduated in the pandemic. I graduated from my master's in 2021. So I think I was part of that new wave of facilitators that were coming into a brand new kind of climate of facilitation. And I remember graduating and being really, really nervous because I was not sure what to expect, because throughout my learnings I was taught, oh, the industry is really different now, like we don't know what to expect. I did my whole dissertation on how has the pandemic influenced like intergenerational facilitation especially. But what I found was that I think people really wanted connection, and people felt like more, a lot of the programs that I end up joining, that there was more facilitators than ever because people like wanted to be in a room so badly.
And making a difference as well, especially.
Yeah, I think the time of the pandemic brought a lot of like self-reflection, and there was a lot of people that I've met through the industry who had been working 9-to-5 jobs for like 4 or 5 years, and then they were like, oh, the pandemic made me want to freelance because I realized I need to like take control of what I do with my time and what kind of spaces I want to facilitate in, which I think is really admirable, actually. I think it's lovely.
Yeah, and we were talking about this earlier as well. I think from my experience, actually, the pandemic was a very different catalyst for a lot of people who were already freelancing in the performing arts.
Yeah.
It was quite a traumatic time. As a freelancer, being self-employed, everything that was going on, there was no money coming in from, at all, given the atmosphere that we were in. So a lot of people I know actually stopped freelancing after the pandemic. They were like,
it makes sense. I think it can be unstable industry at the best of times, but I think
I definitely considered it too. I was like,
I think it's
what's happening?
I think of it now, like I didn't freelance as much as I do now back then. In fact, I don't even think I was during the pandemic. It was only afterwards. But since the pandemic and having freelanced, I've gone, oh, I really hope there's not another one, because I'm just worried what would happen. Because a lot of, it's not just a case of, oh, I won't get paid, whatever. It's a lot of the people I work for have jobs that require people being able to interact, like they are for performing arts schools and stuff, and those really depend on places being open, there not being a lockdown, and so if they're not functioning, then what happens? So that's been a bit of a thought in my mind, but not enough to make me stop doing it, because I do like freelancing quite a lot.
I do think, on a positive spin though, to what you just said as well, I do think people did start appreciating the arts a little bit more during the
Definitely.
pandemic
Yeah.
and
100%.
after. I do think there is an after effect as well. I do think that one of the differences I've noticed is that people start to think of the arts a bit differently. They realize that everything we do in life is art, you know,
Yeah.
from the way you dress to the way you talk to the way you express yourself. But also, you know, how important TV was during the pandemic, how important it was for people to stay creative, whether it was drawing at home, singing,
Zooms.
Zooms,
You
playing
know.
games,
Yeah.
using our creativity to find different ways to connect. I do think that was a change. And also in lots of parents who have, we're in 2024 now, the pandemic was 4 years ago. So lots of parents who have 3 or 4 year olds, or even slightly older, 5 to 6, a lot of the conversations that I've been having with them since the pandemic, or like since they started joining dance classes and drama classes, is how important this social skill was for them, because a lot of these children didn't get to experience that during COVID. They didn't go to nursery, or there were so many restrictions who they could socialize with, and you can see the aftermath of that.
Yeah, because
you
they
can
missed
see-
out on a lot of milestones. I definitely see that in so many young people that I facilitate with. I feel like more parents than ever are like, oh, I see the like developmental side of like in terms of communication and building independence, like all the skills that we're like trying to really push forward that the arts gives, especially Moving Waves, because it's not a regular like performing arts academy. But I feel like, I'm definitely feeling that back from parents, that they really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I was just remembering that first year after COVID, it wasn't even a whole year. It was when we were just about that first September after things were opening up again, and we started having this new influx of children, 4 to 5 year olds. I remember like very vividly how difficult these classes were. Not in not difficult as in like not enjoyable, but more in terms of behavior management. And it was this whole experience of having to reinstate to children, this is a classroom. You have to listen. This is not being at home watching TV.
Yeah, because they've never had to do that before up to that point, probably.
That was a very challenging year from a teaching perspective.
It's the same with a lot of with older kids who maybe turned 18. I'm calling them kids. I mean, that's an adult at that point, but
early teen.
People who turned 18 during the pandemic, and obviously going to the pub is a big milestone in growing up, turning 18 and being able to go out and drink with your friends. These people have been, had that taken away from them, and then to suddenly be allowed to do it without having the moment of celebration of turning 18. There's
Making
classes
the
I've taught
mistakes.
where they've been like absolutely crazy because they've been deprived of these key moments in their life to be shared with, in social situations, and they've had to do it at home on their own. There's certain milestones that I think should be really important to have with other people that a lot of people have missed out on. I think sometimes they find it hard to respect authority because obviously you can't really tell someone off on Zoom. It just doesn't have the
Same effect, no.
doesn't have that same
You
sort
just
of
turn
free
off your
effect.
camera.
You shut the laptop and then that's it. But in person, I remember teachers that I would be so scared of because they had that way in the classroom.
And everyone was on mute on Zoom as well, so you couldn't really hear. You couldn't you didn't know who wasn't.
So they just there's some kids that just don't respect authority, and I think that's because of being on Zoom for too long.
Talking about Zoom, for example, and all these video classes we used to do, I do think also COVID was a milestone for how the digital world has entered the performing arts. Obviously, we are millennials. We've had technology with us for quite some time. But I do think, when COVID happened, everything went digital. It was literally everything digital. And not just the fact that we couldn't interact in person, but also things like touching, even when we went back, when things started opening up, things like, exchanging papers and things like that. Everybody was preferring to do these things online, which, that's probably the only positive thing that I think COVID has brought. I mean, not COVID as such, but the time of COVID, you know, the pandemics and the whole change that's happened during that period. I do feel the use of technology has been a massive thing, a massive advantage. So.
Yeah, I think it brings a lot of resilience to the arts industry as a whole. That, you know, I feel like there's something to be said about people wanting to connect, even if it is through Zoom, and finding ways. Like in my dissertation, I did like online workshops and in person to compare the two. And actually the online ones actually were much easier to do in the pandemic than in person. Yeah. Kind of like you were saying, because of like, we're in a room together again, we don't know how to talk to one another. But yeah, I think also a lot of the Zoom facilitation made us think about accessibility as well, and how can we connect to more people, which I think now that we've kind of in this kind of aftermath of everything that's happened, like 4 years on, I think that's also left a trickle effect of like, how do we make the arts more accessible, that everyone can access them in different ways, you know?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the different generations. For example, our care home residents, it wasn't that easy to do Zoom classes. It wasn't, there was so many,
so much
things
more
to
steps
factor
to
in.
do, wasn't there?
Yeah, and then you have the children, the 5-year-olds, and they're there like logging into Zoom, like having a proper chat, being able to mute themselves when they need to, like, you know, having all this like knowledge, and then they're still like trying to like, oh, have you muted? Have you done it?
I do agree though that I think that, you know, that one aspect of COVID, that it forced us to rethink the way we communicate or sort of adapt to it, has been a positive thing. Like being able to connect with people that maybe don't live anywhere near you in the industry or whatever. And, you know, it used to be that you had two options, a phone call or you'd go and meet them somewhere. You'd never really Skype. That wasn't really a thing that you did.
Everyone hadn't forced. I feel like COVID forced everyone.
Yeah, but now it's a given that like Zoom, if you don't live anywhere near each other, you'll probably Zoom, which is, in my opinion, better than a phone call, but not as nice as meeting up with someone, of course. But if they live over in Cornwall, I'm not going to just pop there for the day.
Yeah, we did Zooms with people in India as well.
Yeah,
for like,
amazing.
I did like forum theatre with people from India, which I was like, that would never happen.
No.
Like, it definitely did open up different ways of learning about one another. And like, I think as somebody who was like going through the facilitation journey in the pandemic, I feel like I came out the other end going, okay, I feel like I have some new tools that I may not have considered had this not happened, or like I'm thinking about things a different way. Which I think there's some sort of silver lining, I think.
I mean, when I first started, like 8 years ago, I had everything on paper, like all my registers, all the payments. It was like tick if someone's paid, you know, and now thinking the way we do things now with using technology and having everything so much more organized, I'm just like, how did that ever used to be a thing? How did we used to, like, I used to carry like blocks of like paper with me in every class and making sure I write down, and there were some times that I would forget to put a tick if someone's paid, for example, and then it would be the whole conversation. I didn't want to make anyone feel that I'm saying they didn't pay, for example. You know, all these like little things. They are little things, but they do, thinking about the comparison of how it's evolved since that.
Yeah.
It's kind of a crazy concept that used to be a way.
You can't think of any other way of doing it now. Like, I don't know if either of you do self-tapes, but those are... What do you feel about self-tapes in general? You know,
I hate them. I've done loads of self-tapes. Definitely hate them.
So pre-COVID, they weren't as big of a deal. They were still there.
There were still editions, physical editions.
Yeah, and self-tapes were a thing, but they weren't
as
like
widely
the
considered.
given thing.
Yeah.
It was like, if you can't get to Manchester for the audition, yes, you can self-tape. Now it's, please self-tape. We don't want you turning up. But I quite like them.
I think it's good in a way, but I feel like then, because everyone, like every actor that I know has a really impressive setup,
right?
And I wonder, like, oh, that's a lot of money to have to invest in that, because now the standard has gone up, you know, because everyone's doing it now as well. And then I'm always like, do they watch them all? At least if you go into a room, you know, oh, at least they saw me. Yeah, they made me. I sang one bar of music for them.
Yeah.
But at least they saw me.
And
whereas,
you know what they saw as well.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Versus self-tape, not that I don't trust them. I'm sure they do, but you do wonder because there's probably the volume has also increased.
Yeah.
I think it's good overall though, but
And
I do have questions about it.
There's like the thought going into a self-tape of, I've got to grab them in the first 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Whereas in an in-person audition,
And
You
you
also
don't
have the-
and you could do it multiple times as well.
Yeah.
Like, so you could, you know, it's like,
I think that's why I like it. It's because I'm just in my
course.
sitting room, no one else here. I can do this as many times as I want, and I'm not nervous. But my acting's probably worse for that reason.
no.
Well,
of course
I
not.
found when I was doing self-tapes, I mean, I haven't done a self-tape in ages, but I mean, because I'm such a perfectionist as well, I'd watch something back and I'd be like, no, I can do that line better. And then I'd go back and redo it.
Yeah.
And then there was another line I didn't like, or I would mess up something. And I just felt like it would take so much of my time just going back and forth, and redoing it. But also, I guess I enjoy meeting people in person. I enjoy that like interpersonal relationship, whether it was like successful or not as an audition. Personally, I think that was so much more valuable. At the same time, you know, that was almost impossible to do if you had a full-time job or if you had to
Yeah, it's definitely more accessible so that you could be like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm just going to spend an hour, 2 hours putting the self-tape together, send it off, and you could do like 3 or 4 of them. Do you know, you could get so many more auditions in versus you be waiting at an open call.
There's pros and cons, isn't there? Like,
Exactly.
I don't know where I stand with whether I think it's good or bad, but I mean, to have it as an option can't be a bad thing, can it?
Have you
Yeah.
been doing any physical auditions, or has everything
I've done a
been...
few. I've done a
August,
few.
okay.
Um,
And you don't know which one you prefer, for example?
I don't know. I get way more nervous for in person, obviously, but I think sometimes that makes me act better because I'm nervous.
Yeah,
and you
that's
get
how
one
I
shot,
feel.
And I don't know.
I feel like you have more of a genuine
Yeah.
feedback, you know, in terms of like, because I know some actor friends that I know like record themselves in their pocket, like they'll record
really?
the
Oh, wow.
audition like so they can listen back because they'll be like
yeah.
warped sense of thinking. At least they have that of going, okay, like I sounded really good, or like
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
you know, that line was actually quite great. You know, they can listen back a couple
Yeah,
of days
yeah,
with
yeah.
a bit of a clear head.
Fair
Versus
enough,
with
yeah.
the self tape, it's like you never really hear back what they thought,
No.
or you know, that kind of way. You have that little, it's like when you apply for like loads of jobs and
Yeah.
you never hear back from like most of them.
Yeah.
So, you know, and you're like, oh, a bit of feedback would have been really helpful. I think it's also like accessible that people
Yeah.
can do, and it opens up more casting
I
opportunities.
guess it's good to have both options, isn't it?
Yeah, I
And maybe
think it's
like
good.
you work it out around that. But yeah, it's true. It's like all these pros and cons.
Yeah,
like in one
yeah.
hand this makes sense, on the other hand this makes more sense. But
Yeah, but I couldn't think of
Yeah.
a world where it wasn't an option now.
yeah.
Like that, I think that's the
true.
thing. It's like COVID made that become commonplace.
I just remembered that when I came to audition here when I was 17, they were giving me the option of a self-tape, and this was back in like 2010, where like, you know, your phone wasn't good enough basically in 2010 to film. I sound so old saying that, but you know, like 14 years ago, phones
Yeah.
weren't like, so I had to actually go to a photographer's like studio, and like he recorded it and he put it in a DVD, and I had to like pause the
Wow.
DVD. And that was at the time that felt like, wow, it's like so advanced. I can just like film it from Cyprus and send my auditions, so I don't need to go. And like now, you know, 14 years later, I guess, it's crazy. Like this is the norm.
Yeah,
Even if
yeah.
you live here, it wasn't like just because I was away, I could still do it.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So from your experience in moving waves, what would you say are your key learnings?
I think that it's if you have to that starting out strict or being how do I phrase this? Being the fun teacher or being a teacher where the kids really like you doesn't necessarily make you a good teacher.
No.
Like, in fact, probably the opposite is the case. If you start strict or start putting in the rules straight away, then they are more likely to do the work, enjoy doing the work, and also learn while they're doing the work.
I think it builds trust.
It builds trust.
Setting a common
yeah.
boundary and following through.
Yeah.
Like if you say something and following through, they're like,
100%. Yeah.
they're like,
If I'm
"Alex-
gonna
Alex is
send you
gonna
out
do
next
that."
time,
Yeah.
and then they do it again, and they're outside. And I think that then that allows you to then become actually
cool
become the
and
fun
fun
teacher,
teacher.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
they know that there's consequences. They can't take it. They can't cross a line, and they can have fun within the boundaries. But if they, if they think they can walk all over you, they will. Like,
I
and
feel
that
like,
doesn't mean it's fun
yeah,
for them.
it's not fun for anyone, even
No.
for you, I think, if that happens. I always say that in training, and I feel like everyone's like, yeah, we need to start strict, but it's so much harder to put in practice.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
definitely make a point of it in every time, and then I do see that happening a lot. If you just say, yeah, I'll be strict, but then you enter the room and you see a group of like children, and you're like, everyone's really excited, and you want to like jump on that like enthusiasm with them, which is great.
Yeah.
It's what we do
Yeah, you can do both. Like, I feel like you
with
have to just-
authority at the same time.
Yeah, I don't even think it's authority. I think it's just being like really like direct and transparent about your process. Like a key learning that I think that I feel the benefit of after being in Moving Waves for like 2-ish years now, I think, is as like a freelancer, don't like limit yourself on what you think you can do. I think being really open, and what I think is lovely about Moving Waves is that you offer so much stuff. Like I remember in my interview with you, I was really interested in working with older people in care homes, and I've done that, but I also did quite a lot in nurseries, Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, started out in an art club, musical theatre, did Star Wars thing one time.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
Like I think part of it is also like, as a facilitator, like kind of being willing to challenge yourself a little bit, because I feel like I always say this to the young people, like I have to creatively challenge myself so that like they can feel like they can too, that they give themselves permission. So I feel like as a freelancer, like I don't know, push the boat out, challenge yourself a little bit. Like maybe you know,
Definitely.
it's kind of like what we talked about earlier about saying yes to things and saying like no. I think if you're like, you know what, I think I can do it, and you like talk it through with, I talked it through with you when I was doing art club, and I got like great support throughout it, and then I actually came out the other side going, oh, I actually am more crafty than I gave myself credit for, and I think that I think gave me a massive confidence boost.
That's what I would say. It does really give you
Yeah,
that
and I think it
confidence.
makes you like flexible, that you can just walk into a room and like build a great session, or set the bones for that. I think that's something I've really taken away with, and being able to create my own plans as well, kind of being able to try different things and be really responsive to the group.
I
that
think
you're
that's really
working with.
important, isn't it? Putting your own creativity and not following
Yeah.
someone else's plan because you work for XYZ company. I think as a facilitator, as a creative practitioner, that's a big part of why you
Yeah.
do the job, to be able to do
And
that.
I really appreciate that in Moving Waves I had the flexibility to just try things out, because sometimes things fail, and that's okay. You just brush yourself off. But I think even that, like as a facilitator, failing is really important, because you do that afterwards. But yeah, that's something I've learned massively from Moving Waves. Is how to expand.
That sums up a lot about what we stand for as well. The arts are for everyone. Everyone can do the arts. And even if we as facilitators say, yeah, we can dance, we can sing. I mean, I say that I definitely can't sing. I do my best, but
But you're
I'll give
probably
it a
not
go.
like you're probably not as bad as you think you are. Like I think of a lot of it is belief as well, and
Maybe.
and learning from other people and picking up different ways of working. Like, okay, I might not like be like an opera singer, but I can teach music using dance or something like that. I can use what I have in my skill set beforehand.
Yeah,
I think you can sing. I don't. I
It's a
believe in you,
challenge.
Tina.
I did have to sing to a lot of auditions, but like really basic, like singing. And actually, I never got an audition where I had to sing. I never was successful at it. So maybe that's what caused the whole thing in me. Like, you can't sing. But I do sing sometimes when I teach. And I'm saying, these are the moves we do when the song says do do do, and then I start like singing or whatever, and the kids just look at me.
But they get it. They do it.
They do
like
get
it works.
Yeah. It's true. It's true. No, actually, that's my challenge for this week.
Sing.
I'll bring a solo next week.
Oh, great. Can't wait. I won't be bringing a dance.
My key learning over the last 8 years of being in Moving Waves, after seeing so many different sessions and seeing so many different facilitators in action, in trainings, and in real life, I can 100% say that every single person who works in the arts is so self-critical, including myself. I think it's so easy to just nitpick on all the little things that, all your expectations for a session, for example. I've seen facilitators doing an amazing job with their groups, having, the kids are having a great time, the facilitator is in control, is making sure everybody's included. And then at the end, they'd come to me and they'd be like, oh, Tina, this didn't work, that didn't work, I'm sorry, that wasn't a good session, or things like that. Whereas I thought that was a great session from my point of view. And that's happened so many times over the years. So I think that's my definite key learning, not to be so self-critical. And also the fact that I think I've mentioned this in another episode, but there's been so many times where a client has loved a facilitator. They're like, oh, send this facilitator back. They're great, great chemistry with the group, all of that. And then literally the next day, another client would say, I don't think that was quite the right person for this role. And that was the same person doing probably like very similar workshops, which goes to show that, that voice that we have is our self-critique, is not necessarily what's going on in the room. So that's definitely a key learning. Don't be so self-critical as a creative, as a facilitator. And I think, again, things like managing behavior and managing expectations from the start, that always seems to be a constant challenge that comes up from different facilitators. And also, other than believing in yourself, not being self-critical, and setting the boundaries from the start, from the facilitator perspective, I think the biggest key learning over the years is the power of the arts. It's not that I've ever doubted it, but seeing the evolution of children that have been with us, 8 years, for 8 years now from the beginning, or care home residents, seeing them like week by week or month by month, and everything they get out of the sessions, and just practicing the arts. I think that is not to be missed, the benefits and the power of what we do. So on that note, we'll finish the podcast today. So thanks for joining in, and stay tuned for the next episode coming up.